This happened almost 2 decades ago, but I will never forget it. I attended a small college in western Maryland, near the foothills of the Catoctin Mountains. My friends and I would often drive around the mountains smoking, and we became very familiar with the winding roads. This particular story took place before we had gotten comfortable with the area. It was right when we first started school. A few of my friends and I decided to go for a late-night drive. The roads were narrow and winding, with some parts dropping off the edge of the mountain. Since it was nighttime, we were taking our time. We didn't see many cars out there, which was just how we liked it. However, that night, as we were leaving the parking lot, another car pulled out right behind us. We didn't think much of it at first, assuming it was another student. Once we got onto the back roads, the car behind us seemed to disappear. But as we drove deeper into the mountains, another car appeared behind us. This one was much closer, and we started to get nervous. We weren't familiar with these roads, and they were rough, unpaved paths with nowhere to turn around. I was trying to drive as fast as I could, hoping to shake this car off. All of us were terrified, convinced that whoever was behind us meant harm. Eventually, we spotted a small chapel with a parking lot, so we pulled in to stop and watch. A man with red hair drove by slowly, staring at us the entire time. We were all in a panic. We quickly turned around, sped down the mountain, and parked the car. Then we called campus security to report what had happened. The next day, we received an email from campus security warning us about a man with red hair, glasses, and a beard. Apparently, he had been trying to enter the dorms and had been following women around campus. I was 18 at the time, just starting college, and I will never forget how terrified we were. This story took place a few years ago when my father and I were living in a quiet rural town in Ontario. I was still new to the area and didn't know anyone except for my dad and my co-workers. I had landed a job as a key holder at a liquor store that closed every night at 2 a.m. The store was situated between a pharmacy and a grocery store, a well-lit area where I usually felt safe, not realizing that the town had a reputation for drug issues and sketchy characters. One night, my coworker and I had stayed late to unload pallets of liquor, as another shipment was due the following morning. It was around 3:30 a.m. when I told my coworker she could head home while I finished closing the store, which meant counting the register and tidying up. She was exhausted, and I had the keys anyway. After she left, I wrapped up my tasks, gathered my things, and called my dad. At the time, I didn't have a car, so my dad would pick me up every night and drop me back home, which was only a 5 or 10-minute drive from the store. I have an amazing father, and in return, I always made sure to be ready and waiting outside for him, not wanting him to wait on me since I knew he needed sleep for his own job the next day. I got everything ready to leave, set the alarm, and locked the door behind me. You have to understand, I wasn't supposed to finish this late, and once the alarm system was set, I couldn't go back inside. If I had, the regional manager would get an alert, and the alarm would go off automatically. I didn't have the code to turn it off since I had never worked a morning shift. The store policy stated that if you left something behind, you'd have to wait until the next day to retrieve it. I stood outside, waiting for my dad, when I heard a noise to my left. It sounded like someone was breathing heavily. The pharmacy next to my store had large red columns in front of the entrance, and I thought the noise was coming from around them. I looked over, but saw nothing, so I brushed it off, thinking it was just the wind or my tired mind playing tricks on me. It was nearly 4 a.m. after all, and I had worked hard that night. A few minutes later, I heard the noise again, and my nerves began to tighten. This time, I knew it wasn't in my head. I noticed movement and realized I wasn't alone. A few meters away, someone was crouched behind one of the columns. I couldn't see his face, only his hands gripping the side of the column, and his head slowly turning to look in my direction. Fear froze me in place. I knew my dad couldn't be far, so I grabbed my phone and called him. He answered quickly, and I told him to hurry up because someone was hiding next to me, and I was terrified. My dad said he was on his way and told me to grab my keys and get back inside the store. But in my panic, my hands were shaking, and I couldn't find them. It felt like an eternity, but I managed to look up just in time to see the man stand up, still concealed behind one of the columns, and move closer to me. I asked my dad where he was, and he shouted that he was almost there. I slowly started moving toward the grocery store on my right, keeping my back to the man. The tall, imposing figure looked at me again, but this time, he stepped out from behind the column and began walking toward me with the biggest smile on his face. I froze, thinking, this is it. I'm going to die. I didn't know whether I should run or try to fight him, but before I could decide, I heard a loud noise from behind me. I turned to see my dad speeding into the parking lot, honking his horn and flashing his high beams. I'm sure the sight startled the man, because my legs finally started to move, and I ran as fast as I could, leaping into my dad's truck. Tears streamed down my face as I watched the man slowly wave at us, his gaze never leaving my dad's truck. We drove off and I was still in shock. My dad, seemingly unfazed, said, "Oh my God, I guess you haven't met Peter yet." I didn't understand what he meant, and my dad started laughing, his eyes watering from the amusement. I just stared at him, still trying to process what had just happened. There was nothing funny about what had occurred moments before. I thought I was about to be attacked, and here my dad was laughing. He explained that Peter was a kind man with a cognitive disability. Peter lived in the area and would visit the Tim Hortons next to my store every morning, offering hugs to anyone who wanted one. It was something he did every day, and everyone in town knew him. My dad told me I should give him a hug next time I got coffee, because I probably scared him half to death. So, Peter the hugger, I'm sorry, but let's not meet again. Not while I'm alone outside at 4 a.m. Anyway. Let me share a strange experience that happened to me in the fall of 2020. After spending over a year near a big city, I decided to move back to my small hometown, which has a population of about 10,000. Before that, I was in college and living in other places, and I hadn't really kept in touch with anyone from my town except for family. In fact, I had even deactivated my Facebook for a while. So one chilly autumn evening, I decided it was the perfect night to relax and enjoy some wine. My girlfriend and I were lounging on the couch when suddenly we heard someone knock on the front door. It was well past midnight, and she immediately told me not to answer. But I stood up and pulled back the blinds on the door to see a young girl, likely under 20, standing on our porch. She had a blanket and a bag with her. I was shocked. This small town in the Midwest doesn't have any homeless people, and most people here have a strong support system when things go wrong. I asked her what was going on, and she said she was homeless and needed somewhere to stay. My slightly tipsy self thought it would be a good idea to help by letting her stay in the guest room. My girlfriend, however, immediately sat her down and started asking her questions. The answers were vague, and eventually, the girl explained she had knocked on every door down the street looking for a place to stay because she'd had a fight with her mom. So, she wasn't actually homeless, which seemed strange considering the risks involved. It also turned out that we had both attended the same private school, though she went to a branch of it on a college campus. We started bonding over how much we disliked the school, which had a strange, outdated atmosphere. Then, she mentioned that she had a no-contact order against someone at that school. At the time, I didn't understand what that meant, no contact or restraining order, but we continued talking. Then she shocked me by saying she recognized me from Facebook. This threw me off completely since I had never seen this girl before and had a nearly 10-year age gap with her. She explained that she'd seen my mom's name on a local rental listing on Facebook, which I thought was strange since I'd posted it for my mom, who's a realtor. But then she said she knew my mom, which didn't make sense since my mom and I have different last names, and my mom isn't on social media or any online platform to connect with strangers. The next morning, I had some time to think, and that's when things started to feel off. When I drove her home later, I realized she did live on the same street, but she had passed at least 5 neighborhoods and many rows of houses before reaching my place. Was I really the only person she knocked on? Or had she targeted my house on purpose? Later that day, my girlfriend and I came back from running errands, and we saw her standing in front of our house again. I panicked, not knowing how to handle the situation, and my girlfriend said, You let her in. You deal with it. She stayed in the car while I went to talk to the girl. She once again asked if she could stay with us, and I started to feel more and more uneasy. My girlfriend came out and said she wasn't comfortable with her being there, suggesting she might be carrying a weapon or be dangerous. We told her that she could stay, but only if she opened up about everything and explained why she wasn't going home. We sat her down in the kitchen and pressed her for answers, but everything she said was vague. I initially thought she might be in an abusive situation, but eventually, I realized that wasn't the case. She was still in our house, and we had no idea how to get her to leave. By some stroke of luck, she said she was heading to the dining hall and would return later. We quickly posted signs on both the front and back doors that read, "Landlord won't allow additional tenants. Best to go back to your mom's." That evening, as it got dark, we heard banging on the front door, followed by banging on the side and back doors. Eventually, it stopped and we knew it was her. We stayed upstairs and waited. About an hour later, I went downstairs to check. We were hungry and needed to use the kitchen, so I decided to quietly peek through the kitchen door with my finger, just lifting one of the blinds. She was standing in the pitch black outside on our back deck. I made eye contact with her, then turned around and went back upstairs. Time passed and eventually she left. When I opened the door, I noticed she had taken the handwritten signs. The next day, I got a lot of teasing from my family, my mom, cousins, and others, who all laughed at me for letting a stranger into our house. I was embarrassed, but I still had a bad feeling about the whole thing and needed to know more. So, I posted about it on Facebook, and a guy I went to elementary school with messaged me. He asked if it was the same girl, saying she had an obsession with him that led to a restraining order. He told me she was probably harmless, but advised me not to engage with her. Since then, she hasn't come back, and I still have no idea why she showed up at my house or how she knew me. I did invest in a Ring security system, but thankfully, things didn't escalate further. I'm a single mother to a lovable, sometimes stubborn 7-year-old boy. This story took place when he was 5, back in the summer of 2018, and the memory still lingers with me. There's a scenic park along a river that my son and I often visited during the warmer months. One evening, we decided to have a picnic there. When we arrived, there were several families out with their kids, all enjoying the playground. We picked a nice spot on the grass near the water, laid out our large purple blanket, and started eating. I was facing the playground, casually observing everyone, when I noticed a group of 3 kids who seemed to be on their own. There were 2 boys and 1 girl, probably between the ages of 9 and 12. Right away, I felt uneasy. You know that gut feeling when something just doesn't sit right? That's what I got from them almost immediately. I tried to push the feeling aside since they were just kids, but still, the unease didn't go away. My son and I were almost finished with our meal and ready to play when a few dark clouds started rolling in. Living in Florida, this is pretty common during summer evenings, so I figured we'd wait it out and see if it would pass. And it did. Most people cleared out of the park, but the group of kids stayed behind. That's when I realized they were definitely alone. I figured they probably lived nearby, so I took my son over to the swings. The kids, however, just hung around near us, staring but not speaking. Then, the youngest of the boys stepped right in front of my son while he was swinging, almost getting hit. He didn't move. I asked him what he was doing, but he didn't answer. I started feeling more and more uncomfortable, so I quickly took my son off the swing and led him over to the jungle gym on the opposite side of the playground. We played for a while on the other side, and I didn't see the kids anymore, so I thought maybe they had left. After about 10 minutes, I glanced toward the parking lot and saw them again, talking to an older man with a dog. They were over there for another 5 minutes or so, and then the man and the kids went their separate ways. The man walked down the street in the opposite direction, and the kids returned to the park, heading straight for the jungle gym where my son was playing. I was still sitting on a bench about 10 feet away, keeping an eye on them. They started talking to my son, asking him things like how old he was and where he went to school. He was busy climbing around and answered them without really paying much attention. But I couldn't take my eyes off the kids. Something about them just didn't sit right with me. After a few minutes, they got off the jungle gym and began walking toward the road. I was so focused on the top of their heads that I didn't notice my son had started walking with them. It wasn't until they were almost at the street that I realized. I screamed his name, and he turned around and ran back to me. I asked where he was going, and he told me they said they had something to show him. We left right away. I still don't know if their intentions were malicious, but I can't explain why they tried to lead my son out of the park. I often think about what could have happened if I hadn't been paying attention. Was that old man involved in some way? I've since spoken to my son about the importance of following the stranger danger rule, even if they're kids his age. We don't go to that park anymore. Sometimes I drive by and see the older man again, but I haven't seen those kids since that day. A long time ago, when I was a freshman in high school, I was in a foreign language class. The teacher gave us a project and let us choose our partners. I didn't have anyone in mind that I wanted to work with, but I ended up picking the guy who sat in the back of the room, Eric. Eric was about 6 feet tall, weighed around 300 pounds, and had a noticeable stutter, so no one ever picked him. I worked with Eric for about 35 minutes on the project, and then the teacher told us that the class was almost over. She said, "Please exchange your phone numbers so you can continue the project outside of class, since I won't be giving you any more time to work on it during class." We swapped numbers, and as we were leaving, Eric turned to me and said, "The little girl picked me today, huh? This will be interesting." He then walked out of the classroom. I tried to ignore it, but it honestly left me feeling a bit uneasy. After school, I was waiting for a friend to pick me up when I noticed I had a voicemail on my phone. It was just under 4 minutes long, so I listened to it. It was Eric's mother, and she was saying how excited she was that Eric had a new girlfriend and how we could get married whenever we wanted. Mind you, we were both still only 15, and I'd only spoken to this guy for about half an hour during a school project. It was incredibly unsettling. But since it was the weekend and my teacher had already left, I decided to wait until Monday to talk to her about it. Over the weekend, Eric kept texting me constantly. He asked what I was wearing, where I was going, and even if I would come to his house so he could brush my hair while I slept. I had him in 3 of my classes, so I felt trapped. I started freaking out. I told him to stop texting me and assured him I could finish the project alone if he'd just leave me alone. When Monday came, I rushed straight to my teacher's classroom. As I arrived, she was just walking in, so I went up to her and said, "I need to talk to you about my partner." When we flipped on the lights and entered the room, Eric was already sitting at a desk, waiting for us. He looked at me and said, "I'm not going to let another little girl get away with this." I immediately turned around and started running down the hallway, and when I looked back, he was right behind me. My teacher was trailing a little ways behind, yelling at him to stop. He caught up with me, tripping me as I was running, which caused me to fall hard on my arm and break my thumb. He was laughing loudly and trying to pin me down, but just as he did, my teacher caught up and pulled him off me. Security showed up shortly after because of the noise. I went to urgent care where they put a cast on my thumb. I stayed home the next day to recover, but when I went back to school, Eric was gone. It was never mentioned again, and it still gives me chills whenever I think about it. To apply for my driver's permit, I chose to visit a center on the outskirts of town. I figured it would be quieter. The place was about a walk and 2 different train routes away. I could have asked my dad for a ride, but I don't like asking for things, so I checked it on Google Maps first. It looked really close to the station, but when I arrived, all I saw was a huge road. The area was industrial, a lot sketchier than I expected. Not wanting to use my phone in a place like that, I decided to approach a small group of women selling fruit. They seemed like they would know the area and be safe to ask for directions. One of them had a man with her, and he said he worked nearby, was heading to his job, and would show me the way. I felt uneasy, but he seemed friendly and sure of himself. He walked me out of the station and down the road, telling me a long story about how he was running late for work and how his boss was going to be mad. The story kept getting longer, and he started acting more jittery, almost like he was saying too much. As we walked a bit further, I realized we were heading the wrong way. I asked him where the center was, and he pointed far ahead to a warehouse. I knew for sure that the place wasn't that far. I tried to stay calm while he kept assuring me it wasn't far. Then, I decided to be more firm and said, "I'd rather be safe, thanks, but I'll just grab a cab." I quickly ducked into a nearby business, which happened to be a vet's office, and called for a cab. When it arrived, it took me in the complete opposite direction. It was definitely unsettling, and I don't know what the man had planned for me once we got to that warehouse, but I'm certain it wasn't good. Hey, everyone, thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to hit the notification bell to be alerted when I post new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. If you have a story to share, head over to my subreddit, r/Let'sReadOfficial, and your story might be featured in the next video. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can get early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon. You can also check out some cool merch on Spreadshirt and listen to the Let's Read podcast to hear all the stories in long compilation form. Great for saving data, too. All links are in the bio. Thanks again, and I'll see you soon. This occurred a while back when I was by myself at home with only my dog. After all this time, I'm sure what happened was odd, and I still don't understand what that man was after. I was sitting on the couch watching TV around 11 p.m. when I heard a car pull up outside and the engine cut off. I assumed it was just a neighbor, but my curious dog wanted to check it out and went over to the window. He ended up messing up the blinds a little, so I got up to fix them. That's when I noticed a car parked across the street, right between my house and my neighbor's place. I couldn't see much, but it looked like the driver was still sitting in the car. I didn't think much of it and went to grab a drink before sitting back down to watch TV. Some time passed after I fixed the blinds, maybe 15 or 20 minutes, but I'm not sure exactly. Out of nowhere, I thought I heard something light tapping at the door. It wasn't a knock. It was much softer and quieter. My dog sat up and looked at the door, so I paused the TV. The same light tapping started on the window next, so I pulled the blinds open just enough to peek outside. There was a man standing there. I couldn't get a good look at his face, but he quickly stepped back from the window and started tapping on the door again. This probably doesn't sound too scary, but for some reason, I suddenly felt this intense fear, though I couldn't explain why. I had this strange feeling that if I opened the door, something awful would happen. The tapping kept going, but something in my mind kept telling me not to open the door. Instead, I went upstairs and cracked a window to ask what he wanted. Once I opened the window, he spoke very softly, saying he was delivering pizza and telling me the price. I felt a bit embarrassed for being scared, so I told him I hadn't ordered pizza. I guess he was speaking so quietly and tapping lightly to avoid disturbing my neighbors. My dog had followed me upstairs and was growling and barking here and there, which was typical for him. I was trying to quiet him when I heard the man downstairs saying he had the correct address and that I needed to come down and open the door to pay for my pizza before it got cold. I was confused because I definitely hadn't ordered anything. As I started explaining this to him again, I realized he didn't even have a pizza with him. He wasn't holding anything at all. I told him again that he had the wrong house, but he started getting angry and kept demanding I open the door. His tone switched between anger and trying to convince me to come back downstairs. I asked him where the pizza was, and he said he was holding it, though it was too dark to see if he had anything in his hands. At this point, my dog was making quite a racket, and the man's voice kept repeating, "Come downstairs, open the door, come downstairs." The noise must have caught the attention of my neighbor because he came outside and opened his front door. The man didn't say a word but quickly ran across the street to the car I had heard earlier. He got into the car, empty-handed. I still don't know what he wanted, but he definitely wasn't a pizza delivery driver. What freaked me out more was how my dog, who is a large breed, was clearly visible through the window, yet the man didn't seem concerned at all. It made it even stranger that he'd driven all the way to my house, almost as though he had planned it. To understand my story, you need to know a little bit about trespassing laws in my country. Thankfully, There are very few restrictions as long as you're respectful and don't damage anything. You're free to walk over any hills you like or camp on any beach you choose, as long as you leave it exactly as you found it. When I was younger, I absolutely loved camping. My family used to go several times a year with a big group of my parents' friends and their kids. There were usually about 10 of us, which made things a little complicated, since we always headed out to a remote beach on the coast. But we weren't the only ones there. Yachts could often be seen floating just offshore, and there were always other campers scattered along the beach. Most of them had kids or teenagers as well, so it wasn't some wild, party-filled scene. It was more of a quiet family getaway. There was even a small building nearby with toilets and showers, even though the area was in the middle of nowhere. I guess the local council had finally gotten fed up with people using the bushes as bathrooms and decided to make it more comfortable. We went on a trip in the spring of 2012. I'm terrible with dates, but I remember this one clearly because I got my dog, Luna, in the winter of 2011. I had picked her out from the shelter in November as a birthday present for myself, paying her adoption fee as a gift. Now, I know many of you are dog lovers, and Luna plays an important role in this story. So let me tell you a little about her. Luna was a 6-month-old puppy when I got her. She'd been rescued from a bad situation involving dog fighting. We weren't entirely sure of her breed, but I'd guess she was a mix of lurcher and terrier. Luna is a lovely, well-mannered dog around people and most other dogs, but you absolutely do not threaten her. She'll defend herself without hesitation. By the time we went camping, I'd had Luna for a few months, and she'd never been camping with us before. But as far as my family was concerned, if you went camping, the dog came too. This time, none of our friends could join us, so it was just me, my sister, my mom, and my dad. I didn't mind much. I wasn't too close to the other kids, and I'd rather spend time with Luna anyway. The drive to the beach was about 6 hours, and because we left later than usual, we arrived just as the sun was setting. It was a poor time to set up a tent, but we expected to see other campers already settled in, their campfires lighting up the beach. But to our surprise, the beach was empty. Despite the empty beach, my parents started unloading the car and setting up the tent. They asked me and my sister to grab the lighter bags from the trunk while they used flashlights to see in the dim light. I rolled down the window for Luna to get some fresh air. It was unseasonably warm, and I wanted her to be comfortable. As we struggled to get things organized in the dark, the whole situation started to feel eerie. The road to the beach was circular, with a bridge over the water, creating a loop you could drive around if you felt like it. I wasn't paying much attention to the road. I was complaining about being tired, as kids often do. But after about 15 minutes, my mom asked my dad if he'd noticed the car driving around. It had passed a few times. My dad shrugged it off, but soon enough, a car pulled up near us, only about 15 or 20 feet away. It was still dark, except for the light from our flashlights, and we weren't expecting anyone else. My mom thought it might be a park ranger or something, though I found that strange for a remote beach. As the man walked closer, we realized he was carrying a large knife, around 15 inches, though I was small at the time, so I'm not sure about the exact size. At first, my dad tried to stay calm and told the man we'd leave, but the guy kept coming closer, shouting that we couldn't camp there. My dad's demeanor changed, and he started shouting back. My sister and I were crying, trembling with fear, as it seemed like a confrontation was inevitable. To be honest, I didn't think my dad would stand a chance if it came to a fight. But then, out of nowhere, Luna sprang into action. She charged at the man and latched onto his arm, biting down with all her strength. He dropped the knife but fought back, kicking and punching her until he finally shook her off. Luna didn't chase after him as he grabbed the knife and ran back to his car, driving off. We quickly gathered our things and piled into the car, shaken but relieved. I checked on Luna, and although she was covered in blood, she seemed okay. But the car windows were much more open than I remembered. We think that during the chaos, Luna managed to hit the window button with her paw and got out. That wasn't the end, though. We were all pretty rattled, and since we had Luna with us, we couldn't stay in a hotel. So, my parents decided to drive home instead. We needed gas, though, so we drove into the nearest town, hoping to fill up. When we reached the petrol station, it looked closed, but my dad drove closer to check. When he stuck his head out the window, my mom asked what he was doing. He said he was trying to figure out when the station opened. And that's when my heart dropped. There, parked behind a van, was the same man with the knife. He was sitting on the hood of his car, using tissues to clean his arm. Without stopping, my dad drove out of there and headed toward the next town. But we soon realized it was 60 miles away, and we didn't have enough gas to make it. We were running low and knew we would likely break down. Dad tried to stay calm, telling us we had roadside assistance, and if we broke down, they'd tow us to safety. Then the worst part of the night happened. The same car, the man had started following us. He must have figured out we were low on fuel, and he was tailing us for over 50 miles. Our fuel gauge was on empty for the last 10 miles, and I thought we might not make it. But by some miracle, we reached a petrol station just in time, and we refueled before finishing the drive home. My sister and I stayed awake in the car after that, too scared to sleep. We made it home, thankful nothing worse had happened. The next day, after a few hours of sleep, my mom called the police non-emergency line and reported the incident. They never followed up with her, but the woman she spoke to mentioned that the man's description matched someone wanted for an unrelated murder. We never found out if it was the same guy or just another crazy person. So what's the takeaway? Besides crazy man on the beach, I think it's this. I'll forever be grateful to Luna. She's still with us, much older now and tougher than ever, as one of my mom's friends likes to joke. I don't know what Luna was thinking that day, but I do know she wasn't about to let anything happen to us. I've always been a dog lover, but what she did for us that day left me in awe. Luna had been mistreated before I got her, but she forgave everyone who had hurt her. If you're considering adopting a dog, know that they'll repay your kindness in ways you can't even imagine. Luna saved us, and I'll be forever thankful. Back when I was attending college, I worked in one of the dining halls during the evening and night shifts. I lived in a small apartment in the neighboring town because it was cheaper than staying on campus. But the downside was that I didn't have a car, so I had to rely on the bus. One night, I had just finished a shift at work. My feet were sore, and I was completely drained. As I made my way to the bus stop, I noticed an older man sitting on one of the two benches at the otherwise deserted stop. I didn't think much of it and sat down on the other bench, putting on some music while I waited for the bus. The first odd moment came when I kept noticing him staring at me from the corner of my eye. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but then I looked over and saw him quickly turn his head away. Okay, so he was staring, but that wasn't too unusual for me. Being a young woman in college often led to some unwanted attention, especially from older men. I decided to ignore him and go back to listening to my music. That was a mistake. I noticed again that he was staring at me, but this time he stood up and walked over to sit next to me. I kept my headphones in, hoping he'd get the hint that I wasn't interested in talking, but instead, he took one of the earbuds out of my ear. "Hey there, sweetheart," he said, and I froze, staring at him in shock. I should have told him off right then and there, but I was too frozen and didn't want to provoke him.
Oh, irrapliakiatli.
He introduced himself as Mike and said he lived nearby. He mentioned how it was always nice to see a pretty girl like me waiting for the bus. He went on to tell me how he was a real man, unlike the boys I went to school with, and that I should come home with him that night. I was too shy and scared to know how to respond, and this was way more forward than anything I had ever encountered. I had certainly received unwanted attention online before, but this was different. I didn't know how to react, so I just stayed silent. That didn't stop Mike. He kept talking, describing in graphic detail all the things he wanted to do to me at his place. It started with the usual stuff, but then it escalated, and he asked me if I liked the idea of being choked until I passed out. I just wanted to get away. I was counting the seconds until the bus arrived, but then Mike said something even more disturbing. "The demons want me to ask for your phone number," he said. "They said you should give it to me, or you won't like what happens next." He actually started stroking my hair. His hand was surprisingly gentle, but I didn't want him touching me at all. This was bizarre for so many reasons. The demons? What did he mean by that? Why was he even touching me? As if he could read my mind, he went on to explain, My therapist knows the demons are real. I told her about them, and she says I'm not crazy. The demons are real. He laughed, then abruptly stopped before demanding again, "Now give me your number," like they said. I was scared, and I really didn't want him to have my number, but he was already pulling out his phone. I knew he'd call it right then and there to make sure I wasn't lying. He kept his hand on the back of my neck, gentle but firm, and I felt trapped. I reluctantly gave him my real number, knowing he'd call it to check. He immediately dialed it, and I just wanted to get away without angering him. Thankfully, the bus came a few moments later, and I sat at the front near the driver since the bus was nearly empty. Mike chose to sit right across from me, though. I hoped that the fact that I was on the bus and had given him my number would end the conversation. But no. He reached over and unzipped my sweatshirt, revealing my work shirt and name tag, which I had forgotten to take off in my rush to leave work. I hadn't told him my name yet, but he said, "Abigail, what a beautiful name. Our daughter will be named Celeste." At that point, I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was. I zipped up my sweatshirt, but he just laughed. "You won't need that soon," he said with a wink, implying how he planned to undress me further that night. When the bus made a stop, he tried to convince me to get off with him. I told him I was tired and just wanted to go home, so he said okay and stayed on the bus with me. I had noticed that this was my stop, but I felt more uneasy as he stayed seated, and I became certain he was planning to come home with me instead. "Baby," Mike whispered in my ear. I ignored him, but he repeated it louder, his unsettling smile growing. "The demons say you smell nice," he added. I was terrified. I felt sick, and by the time my stop came, I bolted off the bus as quickly as I could. My apartment was nearby, but I didn't want him to know where I lived. I rushed inside, locked the door, and peeked through the peephole. I didn't see him right away, so I cautiously checked the window and saw him standing by the bus stop, looking around. He pulled out his phone, and sure enough, my phone rang with an unknown number. I ignored it, but then I started receiving text messages asking where I had gone. He mentioned that he didn't like playing hide and seek and that the demons just wanted to have fun. But I was being childish. I was petrified. He knew where I lived, where I worked, and where I went to school. He had my phone number and my name. The only small relief I had was that he didn't know which specific apartment I lived in. Then I heard him yelling outside. It wasn't any specific words, just random, wordless shouts of what I assumed was frustration. I immediately blocked his number and turned off all the lights in my apartment. I leaned against the door, crying, my back pressed against it. Maybe I should have called the police, but my brain was too frazzled to think of that. The next day, all I knew was that Mike was a mentally unstable man who hadn't physically harmed me, so I didn't think it was worth pursuing. Looking back, I know I made a lot of bad decisions, but I eventually moved away after that semester for unrelated reasons. Before I left, I switched to day shifts at work and was constantly on edge every night. Thankfully, I never saw that man again. I never thought I'd share my experiences, but after a few people showed interest in my last post, I figured I'd tell this one, which still bothers me to this day. It happened in October last year when I was 19, living in England. By that time, it gets pretty dark early. I finished college around 3 p.m. and decided to use my gym membership, so I went to another college building where the gym is located and spent about an hour working out. By the time I left, it was already dark. As I exited the building, a man approached me. He was about 6 feet tall, in his mid-40s, with dark hair that had strands of gray through it. Here's how our conversation went. "Do you go to this college?" "Yes." "Do you know my daughter, Samantha?" "No, there are 4 college buildings. I don't know everyone. She's lost. I called her and I can't find her. You can go to reception and ask for her name. They should be able to help you with her schedule or when she left. Can you help me look for her?" "No, sorry. It'll only take 10 minutes. I don't know the area. Can you show me where the girls usually go?" "No, sorry. I really have to go. Just go to reception. It's right there." At that moment, I felt something was off. I knew I shouldn't have engaged with him, but sometimes people can seem sincere. I started walking down the street, which was a one-way and poorly lit. Only one street lamp lighting the entire way. I used the reflection from my phone to check behind me, and to my horror, I saw this man almost running towards me. I immediately started recording and sent a voice note to my boyfriend, pretending to talk to him on the phone, just in case. I kept this up until I reached a bus stop where there were a few other people around, and I felt safer. I tucked my phone back in my pocket, but when I looked up, I saw the same man standing there, staring directly at me. If looks could kill, I would have been dead. I turned away, positioning myself against the wall so I could keep my eyes on him, ensuring he couldn't sneak up from behind. He walked past me again, and I realized I had missed 4 buses by now. He was trying to figure out which one I would take. Eventually, he walked out of view, and as soon as he did, my bus arrived. I ran on board and immediately called my mom. She was obviously furious and said she'd meet me at the bus stop with a knife, just in case he had followed me. Thankfully, he hadn't, and thank goodness for him, because if he had, things would have gotten ugly. My mom's pretty protective with her blades. Ever since that day, I've been extra anxious going to and from college. I still go there, but I don't go to that gym anymore. Fortunately, the building he saw me leave wasn't mine, but he did notice my bus stop. Now, I always keep my earphones on at a low volume, just in case I hear footsteps behind me. I'd always been drawn to the mystery of old civilizations, especially the ones from Central America. So, when a buddy of mine suggested we camp out near some old ruins in southern New Mexico, I was all for it. We pitched our tent right at the edge of a thick forest and then made our way on foot toward the crumbling site. The worn-down steps of the pyramid and the weathered symbols carved into stone were both fascinating and unsettling. They carried a strange air, like something still lingered there. Once the sky turned dark, we lit a fire and toasted marshmallows, tossing them between graham crackers and chocolate. We laughed, swapped stories, and relaxed, but I couldn't get rid of this gnawing feeling that something was watching us. Every now and then, I'd hear soft noises coming from the woods just past the firelight. My friends waved it off, saying it was probably a raccoon or some other animal, but something in my gut told me otherwise. Trying to shake off the unease, I grabbed my flashlight and wandered back toward the stone structures. The moon lit everything in a silvery glow, the walls, the carvings, even the cracks in the ground. Then, out of nowhere, I caught sight of someone moving between the shadows. It looked like a woman wearing old ceremonial clothing, something like what I'd seen in museum exhibits. She floated closer, barely making a sound. Her eyes glowed faintly under the moonlight, and I stood frozen where I was. As she came closer, I could see the long nails on her hand as she reached toward me. They looked more like claws than fingernails. I tried to scream and spin away, but she grabbed me with this unnatural grip. I pushed and pulled, but it felt like I was trapped in steel cables. She leaned in and whispered something in a tongue I'd never heard, her breath reeking of rot. I was sure I wasn't going to make it out alive. Her lips, ice cold, brushed against the side of my neck. Then, out of nowhere, my friends came running, calling my name and waving their lights around. The woman let go instantly and faded into the darkness like smoke. My friends looked completely lost, trying to understand what had just happened. But I knew it had been something from beyond this world. We packed everything and left the campsite before the sun had even come up. None of us ever spoke of it again, but I made myself a promise. I'd never set foot near those ruins again. That night changed me. I don't question anymore whether strange things exist. But sometimes, late at night, I still think about her, and whatever it was I actually saw in those ruins. I used to head to the mountains several times a year whenever I could make the time. There's something calming about being cut off from everything, like the rest of the world just stops. I don't have to look at my phone or worry about work or check in with anyone. For a little while, it's just me and nature. Each time, I'd go to a little town called Grayson and spend the night before heading out early the next morning. That way, I could beat the crowds and have most of the trails to myself. I became something of a familiar face over time, The folks working the breakfast stops and gas stations recognized me. I'd always fill up on coffee and food before taking the drive up the Alpine Crest Highway. I'd stop at the pull-offs and lookout spots to breathe in the thin, cool air and take in the views. Rolling green hills with leftover patches of snow here and there. I made sure to take my time adjusting to the elevation. The air up there can really sneak up on you if you don't pace yourself. That was the routine I followed every year. But it's been a few years now since I've gone back. I think it happened around 3 years ago. I've kind of stopped keeping track. I try not to dwell on it. When the memories sneak in, they mess me up bad. My chest tightens, and sometimes it feels like I can hear the footsteps again. But I'm jumping ahead. After what happened, I started seeing a therapist. She thought maybe writing it down or telling someone might help. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm not sure if it'll make any difference, but I do just about anything to finally sleep through the night without waking up in a panic. Like I said, 3 years ago, I had another chance to go back. One of those years when I had a decent amount of time off saved up. I decided to treat myself and take a longer trip. The weather was warmer than I preferred. I usually went when it was colder, but I figured it would still be good. I checked into a familiar motel, practically the same room I'd stayed in the year before, dropped my stuff and went to bed. I had my trip all mapped out. I always let someone know where I planned to be, just in case. Even though I knew the area well, I liked to go off the usual routes and explore. If something happened, I wanted people to know where to look. The next morning, I had breakfast at the local diner and shared my hiking route with a couple of workers I'd gotten to know over the years. With my car full of fuel and my backpack loaded, I hit the road. First on my list was a trail that ran near a place called Danner Flats, which I'd somehow never checked out before. I parked on the roadside and looked toward where the old town used to be. From that distance, it looked like a small dot surrounded by forest. I turned off the engine and locked the car, glad to find myself alone on the trail. The fewer people around, the more I felt like I was part of the place. Like when a theater is totally silent, and the movie pulls you in deeper. Noise breaks the spell. Looking back, I wonder if the warning signs were there from the start. It's tough to say when you're surrounded by forest sounds. Branches creaking, birds chirping, animals moving. All of it blends together. Even the most familiar noises can sound strange in the wrong context. As I walked, I heard what sounded like distant thunder. It echoed several times in a row, like a drumline pounding deep in the woods. The forecast hadn't mentioned storms, so I figured it might be a tree falling nearby. Maybe a strong gust had taken it down. I brushed it off and kept walking. The cold air filled my lungs. I felt alive. I passed the usual sounds of squirrels and birds, and even spotted a large footprint in the dirt. Probably a bear. Black bears had been seen around there before. The hike itself was just under 4 miles, not too steep, so not too demanding. 2 hours in, I came across the weathered wooden sign for Danner Flats. It was once a silver mining town, long since abandoned in the late 1800s. I moved through what was left of it. Broken cabins, stone foundations, and scattered signs of what had been. It felt like the mountains had taken the town back, forcing people out. From the little I'd read about the place, it seemed money had dried up. But now I wonder if there was more to it. Only 3 cabins were left standing in any form. The rest had long collapsed. The town had once had about 40 buildings and a couple hundred residents. I sat beneath a tree and drank some water. The silence was heavy, and I watched the woods closely. That's when I felt it. Someone watching me. It was like the back of my head was a magnet. I stared toward one part of the trees, sure that's where the feeling was coming from. Then I saw a shadow move. At first, I thought it was just an extra dark patch where the light didn't reach. But then it shifted. Something was in front of the sunlight, not just an absence of it. I told myself it might be a bear or maybe a moose, but whatever it was, it stood too tall. Much too tall. I didn't move. I wasn't about to draw attention to myself. I had bear spray, sure, but I didn't want to find out if it would work on whatever this was. Eventually, the shadow slipped back into the trees. I stood up quietly and began to head back. That's when I heard branches snap. Again and again, louder and louder. It went on for more than a minute. It sounded like something was tearing through the forest. My ears rang from the intensity of it. Just as I got to the edge of the town, I saw it again. This time, it wasn't far away. I could make out more of its shape. It had massive antlers, but not the thin ones like elk. These were thick, broad, closer to a moose, but exaggerated, like they belonged on something not from here. The antlers looked like they could push a snowplow with ease. I stepped back, twigs breaking underfoot. I had no clue what I was dealing with. The thing was too big. I couldn't make out the rest of it through the trees, but it was towering. Then I saw its eyes. First one pair, then another just beneath them. Two sets, like some nightmare sketch brought to life. The way they reflected the sunlight was the only reason I could see them at all. I looked away, afraid that direct eye contact might provoke it. I listened to it shuffle around until the noise finally faded. When I looked back, it was gone. I decided I needed to leave. Now, I figured maybe this place was its home, and I just crossed a line. The hike back felt longer, but I kept going, watching every tree, every bend in the trail. Then I saw a new footprint in the dirt, fresh, deep, and huge. I placed my boot inside it, and my foot didn't even cover half of a single toe. Whatever it was heavy and enormous. Still, I wasn't ready to give up the trip. So I headed to my next planned stop a bit early. I always like to wrap up my trips with a visit to Ridgewater Lake, a quiet, clear lake that sat tucked away behind the mountain trails. My car got me most of the way there. I parked near a few other vehicles and made the short walk. But when I got to the water, it felt like everyone had left. Usually there were tourists, couples, kids. Not that day. I felt like I'd missed a warning. I sat on a flat boulder and watched the breeze ripple across the lake. It was peaceful, but something was off. Across the lake, the treetops began to sway, more than they should have. It looked like a windstorm was tearing through them. Then I heard the same loud, cracking sound. Closer now. Whatever I had seen in the forest had followed me. Somehow it had beaten me there, despite the distance. The trees shifted closer and closer. Then something launched from the treetops. I watched it hang in the air for a second before crashing into the lake. It was a boulder, huge, way too big for a person to throw. The water exploded upward. That was enough. I stood up and started to back away. And that's when I knew I wasn't supposed to be there. It was meant to be the adventure of a lifetime. A break from everyday life and a chance to get close to nature deep in the remote forests of British Columbia. But once the sun went down and the fire crackled, my buddies and I started to sense we weren't by ourselves out there. At first, it was nothing more than odd sounds coming from the trees, branches snapping and leaves shifting. But then we spotted a towering figure standing just beyond the clearing. Its eyes reflected the fire's light, and it made deep, heavy breathing noises that sounded almost like growls. One of the guys grabbed his phone, hoping to capture whatever it was. But when he moved closer, the creature gave off a deafening roar. It sent all of us running straight back toward the flames, thinking, or at least hoping, we were safer by the fire. For what felt like hours, we sat there listening as the Bigfoot circled our camp, letting out ghostly cries and horrible, chilling screeches. It felt like it was messing with us, feeding off the panic it caused. As time dragged on, our fear only grew. We had no gear to protect ourselves, nothing that could fight off a creature like that. When we heard it getting closer, the thought hit us hard: we might not make it out of these woods. Then, without warning, the creature went silent. It walked off into the forest, leaving us frozen and shaking. We didn't waste a second. We tore down our tents and left in a hurry, hiking back through the trees as fast as we could. None of us spoke until we were back near town. We've never been back to those woods since. That trip changed all of us. Even now, years later, we still talk about what happened during that weekend in the backcountry, our run-in with whatever lives out there. And sometimes, when we're camping somewhere new and hear an odd sound in the dark, we pause. We listen. We wonder if it's come back, if it's out there, watching. We ended up stumbling upon something lost by pure accident. I thought it would be thrilling and fun to go camping deep in the untamed forests of northern Argentina with my buddies. It sounded like a real adventure. We got all our stuff packed and set off, full of energy, eager to explore a wild place untouched by modern life. The first few days were honestly incredible. We hiked through thick green brush, crossed powerful rivers, and climbed steep hills. We even spotted rare animals, jaguars, big birds, and tapirs. But things didn't stay good for long. One night, while sitting around our fire, we started hearing noises coming from the woods nearby. At first, we just figured it was an animal. But the sounds grew stranger, less like animals and more like people trying to stay quiet. We all got tense but didn't want to make a big deal out of it. So we tried to ignore it and just lay down to sleep. When we got up the next morning, we realized some of our supplies were gone. At first, we blamed raccoons or monkeys, something like that. But that idea didn't hold up. As we kept walking deeper into the forest, we noticed weird signs that someone had been nearby. We saw footprints in the dirt, branches that looked freshly snapped, and even an old jacket left hanging on a tree limb. We told ourselves maybe some nearby villagers were curious or passing through. Still, something about the whole situation felt wrong in our bones. The deeper we went, the more it felt like eyes were on us. That feeling just wouldn't go away. Then it got worse. We started catching quick flashes of people hiding in the woods. They'd vanish the second we turned to look. We were completely freaked out, but we didn't want to give up on the trip just yet. That changed when a group of unknown locals showed up and surrounded us. I had done a fair amount of reading beforehand and hadn't found any info about uncontacted groups in this particular stretch of land. But I knew remote folks might still live out here. They looked like they came out of a different time. Tough, wary people in handmade clothes made from animals, holding sharp tools and rough weapons. They didn't speak our language, and we had no clue what they were saying. But their faces said enough. They didn't want us around. We planned to back away and leave peacefully, but before we could get far, they came at us. We tried to hold our ground, but they were too many. They knew the layout of the land like the backs of their hands. In the end, we had no choice but to leave everything behind and run for it. We lost all our gear and had nothing left but the clothes we wore. We had no signal, no radio, no way to call for help. We were stranded out there, just trying to stay ahead of whoever might be chasing us. Days passed. We ran out of anything to eat or drink. We were weak, stumbling, ready to fall over. But we weren't going to let them win. Eventually, after what felt like forever, we made it out and found our way back to a small village. From there, we were able to get real help. Even now, years later, the memories haven't faded. I still have scars on my arms and legs from branches, thorns, and falling as I ran for my life. We had to dodge traps, sharp things rigged in the trees, and strange wooden setups that I assume were meant to catch animals, or maybe even to catch us. Now, every time I'm in the woods and hear something odd, I think back to that trip and feel a cold chill run through me. I know this story isn't long, but I needed to tell it. It's one of those experiences that digs into your mind and never really goes away. Even after all this time, it still finds me at night when I close my eyes. I never imagined that a backpacking trip in the Smoky Mountains would turn into the most terrifying experience of my life. Still, my boyfriend and I, both longtime trail enthusiasts, decided to hike part of the trail system in Tennessee to celebrate our anniversary. We'd been walking for several hours and eventually picked a spot to stop for the night. It was a quiet clearing with a great view of the hills, so we pitched our small tent and got a fire going before the light faded. We sat close to the flames, swapping memories, roasting marshmallows, and cooking hot dogs. Out of nowhere, we heard twigs snapping in the trees nearby. At first, we figured it was some forest animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon. But the longer the noise went on, and the louder it became, the more nervous we started to feel. Then came a sound that froze us. It wasn't something we recognized. It was a deep, rumbling growl that seemed to echo from several directions at once. We immediately stomped out the fire and scrambled into our tent, hoping to make as little noise as possible. We kept telling ourselves it was just a black bear, but in our gut, we both sensed this wasn't normal. We weren't new to camping. We'd both spent plenty of nights in the woods, and strange noises were part of it. But this was different. We lay there quietly in the dark, listening. The growling kept getting closer, deeper, more aggressive. Then the tent began to shake. Hard. We could hear long nails or claws scraping along the outside. That's when it hit us. Something was trying to get in. We held each other, completely frozen, not knowing what to do next. The sound of tearing fabric filled the air. Heavy breathing followed, and that awful growl never stopped. We honestly believed we were about to die. We started whispering that we loved each other, thinking these might be our last words. Then the tent ripped wide open. Standing right in front of us was something out of a nightmare. Tall, covered in thick hair, with long teeth that gleamed in the moonlight. It didn't look like any animal we'd ever seen. It let out this roar, loud enough to shake the ground. We thought we were finished. But then, out of nowhere, a black bear charged into view, growling just as loud. Maybe it felt challenged. Maybe it was protecting its territory. Whatever the reason, it went straight for the creature. They crashed into each other, biting and clawing in a violent fight. The sounds were brutal, snapping, growling, shrieking. We watched in horror as they disappeared into the trees, still battling. That was our only chance. We jumped up and ran, faster than we ever had in our lives. By some miracle, we found the main trail again and kept running until we reached one of the ranger stations. A few other hikers were there, and we told them what happened. From there, we were airlifted to a hospital. The doctors checked us over, and we were okay, just shaken up. To this day, I have no clue what that thing was. I sometimes wonder if nature itself stepped in to protect us. After doing a bit of reading years later, I learned that it was around the time when female bears are extra protective of their cubs. Maybe that bear just happened to be in the right spot at the right moment. All I know is we're still alive, and I'll never forget what happened in those woods. Right after finishing high school, a few of us decided to take one last trip together before going our separate ways for college. We settled on hiking the John Muir Trail. A couple nights of camping, hiking, and drinking sounded like the perfect send-off. My boyfriend at the time, Lucas, pulled into my driveway to pick me up. I'd never been to the John Muir Trail before, so he did his best to explain how amazing it was. "You'll love it," he told me. "Fresh mountain air, no noise, nothing but trees and open sky. It's perfect. I'm pretty sure Mother Nature wouldn't be cool with all that beer you've got stashed in the back," I said. Lucas laughed and pulled out a sandwich bag filled with weed. "She'd be fine with this though," he said. "She grew it herself." "You were holding out on me?" I said, grabbing the bag and taking a big sniff. The familiar earthy smell hit my nose. "We've got a long drive. Might as well roll one." "Good idea," he said, syncing his phone to the Jeep stereo and blasting old-school rock from the early 2000s. As I lit the joint and we headed out, I felt that exciting buzz that only comes from road trips. We all planned to meet at a spot near the Vermilion Cliffs Bridge in northern Arizona. The bridge connects the National Scenic Byway and runs through parts of the Muir Trail system. Crossing it on foot was a little sketchy. There's barely room for pedestrians. Cars and semis passed close, but we made it safely across. We hiked for about 2 hours before stepping off the marked trail to find a place near the creek to set up for the night. We had 6 people total and brought 3 tents. Lucas and I shared one. Then there was Marcus and his girlfriend, Eliza. And finally, the twin sisters, Lacey and Leah. I cracked open a watermelon-flavored seltzer and leaned back, soaking in the peaceful view. The sun painted the sky orange as it disappeared behind craggy cliffs. The same cliffs that dropped steeply to the wild, freezing stream nearby. Marcus and Lucas started gathering wood and lighting a fire as night crept in. The drinks started flowing again. The fire flickered, giving everything around us a soft, golden glow. We laughed and looked back on our years in school, talking about what we thought the future might hold. Lucas suddenly got quiet. He was staring out across the water. "What is it?" I asked. I think I see a canoe or something, just floating off the edge of the creek," he muttered. We all turned to follow his gaze. Yeah, I see it too, Leah said. Marcus went to his backpack, pulled something out, gave it a quick spin in his hand, then aimed it toward the water. Is that a gun? Put that away, I said. Lucas squeezed my hand and replied, It's just a flare gun. Chill. Marcus fired it. The flare streaked across the darkness and lit up the nearby trees and the boat. It was real. 2 people stood inside it. They wore matching burnt orange sweatshirts with the hoods pulled up, faces hidden. Jesus, they're just watching us, Lacey muttered. Get lost, creeps, Marcus shouted, scooping up rocks and throwing them at the boat. Lucas joined him. After a few seconds, we heard a motor sputter to life, and the boat glided away upstream. Eventually, the tension eased. We did our best to forget about it, kept drinking, laughing, and eventually crashed in our tents. The next morning, I woke to voices outside. I dragged myself out of the tent, shielding my eyes from the bright sunlight. My head throbbed and my stomach flipped. Lucas stood there frozen, hands locked on top of his head, staring down at something. There, beached against the bank where we had set up camp, was the same small boat from the night before. What is it? I asked. Lucas shook his head. They came back. They tied the boat here. Everything's gone. They stole our gear. Marcus joined us, looking around with a nervous expression. I can't even find the trail, he said. I've got a little water and some food left in the tent. Let's eat and then try to retrace our steps. We ate what we could, then packed up to find the trail again. We'll cover more ground in pairs, Marcus suggested. Just don't go too far. If you find the path, yell. He and Eliza took one route. Lacey and Leah walked about 20 yards in another direction. Lucas and I took the last route. He held my hand as we quietly made our way through the trees. The forest was silent except for the crunch of branches underfoot. I think I see something, Lucas whispered. I looked around, squinting between the trees. That's when I saw it. We both seemed to notice it at the same time, judging by the look on his face. To our left, maybe 30 yards away, stood a man in a hunter orange hoodie and a camo ski mask. He was still, just staring. Even when we turned and bolted, he didn't move. We sprinted without looking back. I was running so hard I didn't see a thick vine and tripped. I caught myself with my hands, but a flash of pain shot up my right arm. It wasn't broken, but it felt bad, twisted at least. Lucas rushed back and helped me up. I cradled my wrist against my chest while he gently checked it. I saw movement behind him. Another man, in the same orange hoodie and mask, stepped out from behind a tree. I pointed at him with a shaking finger. Lucas looked and then whispered, "We've got to go." He tugged me along, careful not to touch my injured arm. We veered left, running fast. The trees broke and we stumbled into a clearing. It looked like someone had been there recently. A fire pit still smoked in the center. Then Lacey and Leah came through the brush from another side, followed by Marcus and Eliza. We all had nearly identical stories. They led us here, Leah said. They were herding us like animals. What the hell do they want? Marcus asked. Well, maybe you shouldn't have fired a flare at them, I snapped. They were watching us. What was I supposed to do, wave? He snapped back. Enough, said Lacey. We need to get back on the trail. We scanned the area. The clearing was roughly half the size of a football field. The only thing strange was the still warm fire pit. Let's all go back into the trees together. The path can't be far, Lucas said. We walked toward the side we had come through, but just as we reached the edge, figures stepped out of the tree line. More masked men. We turned and ran toward the opposite side, but more of them emerged. In total, at least a dozen of them surrounded us. Some were armed with rifles. We grouped together in the center. Panic set in. 2 of them grabbed Lacey and Leah, dragging them backward as they kicked and screamed. Lucas and Marcus rushed forward. Marcus punched one man hard enough to knock him down. He helped Lacey to her feet, but then a deafening blast cracked through the air. The gunshot threw everything into chaos. My ears rang. I saw blood. Marcus was on the ground, Lacey screamed as she realized what had happened. Lucas turned to run. Another shot. Blood sprayed from the side of his head. He dropped instantly. Eliza yanked me behind a tree, trying to muffle my screams. We didn't say a word. We just ran. My body burned. My lungs felt like they were tearing apart. But we didn't stop. After what felt like forever, we found the trail again. "The bridge!" I shouted. We ran until we reached the road. We flagged down a pickup truck, screaming and waving. The driver called 911. When the police arrived, I tried to explain what happened. My story poured out through gasps and tears. Eliza couldn't even speak. She just vomited and shook uncontrollably. Several hours passed. By the time the search teams arrived, the sun was beginning to dip again. They found them. 2 rough crosses made from tree branches had been built. Lacey and Leah were strung up on them, sliced open, tied together by their intestines. Their guts draped around the wooden structure like some nightmarish decoration. Lucas and Marcus lay below the crosses, shot dead. No one could figure out why it happened, and I will never ever step foot on the John Muir Trail again. I've always had a deep love for camping, and Glacier National Park had been on my must-see list for as long as I could remember. The idea of soaking in the park's breathtaking landscapes up close had always thrilled me, but I had no clue that the trip I was so excited for would turn into something I'd never want to relive. A buddy and I arrived at the park and picked a secluded site way out in the woods. We pitched our tent, settled in, and felt like we found the ideal spot. It was quiet, peaceful, and far from the crowd. Being surrounded by untouched nature was exactly what we wanted. The first couple of days were just about perfect. We explored the trails, spotted animals, and admired the park's amazing scenery. But by day 3, things took a sharp turn. While walking a trail that morning, we began hearing unusual sounds off in the trees. At first, we figured it was normal forest noise, maybe some animals nearby. But then the noises got louder and more unsettling. There was this deep, rumbling growl that sent chills up my spine. We tried brushing it off and kept going, but the growling didn't stop. After a while, we started getting that awful sense that we weren't alone. Our skin was covered in goosebumps. Then we caught a glimpse of something between the trees. It was a dark shape standing still in the woods. We were too far to make out what it really was, but it looked huge. Much bigger than anything we'd expect to find out there. It didn't seem natural. On the way back to our campsite, the sound followed us. The growl, low and menacing, stayed close. We tried to act normal, but inside we were both panicking. Once we got back to our tent, we zipped ourselves in and didn't move. Outside, the growling got louder, and we could hear movement nearby. At one point, whatever it was started scratching at the fabric of our tent. The noises it made were unreal, twisted, and horrible. Every second was pure fear. We didn't sleep much that night, and when we did, it was broken by terrifying dreams. The moment the sun came up, we tore down our camp in record time and got out of there without even glancing back. Even now, I have no clue what we encountered. I've tried to reason through it, but nothing explains what we saw and heard. I still believe that whatever was out there wasn't something we were meant to understand. That trip continues to haunt me, and I know I'll carry the memory forever. I can say with certainty that I won't be going back to Glacier for a camping trip again. But don't let my story scare you off completely. The place is still incredibly calm and beautiful, in its own eerie way. A little context before I get into it. People tend to say the same thing about me. I spend a lot of time outside. I hunt, fish, hike, camp, and paddle. My friend? Not so much. He just joins me for what we call party camping. And that's really the extent of his wilderness skills. Nothing in our lives had ever come close to what happened that weekend. This all went down back in the fall of 2019. The day before, we had been staying at a small lake tucked inside White Pine Forest, up in the northern part of Michigan. The season was changing. Trees were showing off their red and orange shades, and leaves had started to drift down. Nights were near freezing, being mid-October. My buddy doesn't deal well with cold, so he'd hop in the car and drive around most mornings just to warm up. We usually drove into a nearby town to grab fuel and supplies, mainly more beer. There wasn't a whole lot to do at our site. No trails, no real activities, and since it was chilly and damp, we mostly leaned into day drinking, played music, and chatted about past party trips. The forecast for the next day said rain and clouds, so we planned to kill time by driving around to check out other campsites in the area and mark ones that looked good for later trips. We drank quite a bit that night and stayed up late. Everything sounded normal: wolves howling, owls in the distance, even a few loons. The usual background noise of the forest. But eventually it all stopped. Not a single sound. It was dead silent. That sort of quiet felt almost peaceful, but strange. By morning, a light rain had started. Just a sprinkle at first, but enough to make camping less fun. We got up later than usual, both of us groggy and cold. We put on warmer clothes and jumped in the car, mostly to heat up and shake off the hangover. It was around noon when we left the lakeside spot to start looking at other areas. The next campground we had in mind was only about 6 miles away, sitting right off the highway with little privacy. Not our favorite kind of setup. Still, we stopped to check it out, but the rain got worse. We stayed in the car, taking notes on which campsites we liked or didn't. This one wasn't great. The thing about White Pine Forest is that it's filled with campgrounds and single campsites scattered all over. They're rarely connected by trails. You usually have to get back on the highway, find a small wooden sign pointing to more sites, and then drive way back on narrow dirt roads for 10 or 15 minutes to reach them. We managed to scout out 8 spots before 5 p.m. We were just pulling into what we figured would be our last stop for the day. The wooden sign at the entrance said the dirt road stretched 14 miles. I took it slow, not wanting to throw rocks against the bottom of my car. The trees leaned in overhead so much it felt like we were driving into a tunnel. About 5 minutes in, the rain stopped. We reached the campsites at the end of the road and realized nobody else was around. It was getting dim, and since we had been sitting all day, we were ready to move our legs. We parked at the first available site and got out. Birds were chirping like they were settling down for the night. The whole place felt still. This part of the forest had 5 campsites arranged in a rough circle, surrounded by dense woods. The sites weren't private at all, only worth staying at if you were renting every one of them. We walked around the circle and noticed a faded wooden sign that said "Group Camp," pointing to a gravel path that led deeper into the trees. We figured we might as well check it out. The path was slick with wet leaves, but we kept walking. After a while, I noticed how far we'd gone and mentioned to my buddy that the site might be a lot further than we thought. He wanted to keep going, so we did. It was almost dark, but we could still see enough to move safely. At some point, I realized the birds had stopped singing. The forest had taken on that heavy, muffled kind of quiet. The only sound was the crunch of wet leaves under our boots. Eventually, we got to the group site. It sat at the very end of the trail in a clearing. Nothing moved. It was completely still. I felt the hair rise on the back of my neck, and a chill ran through me. Something wasn't right. Off to our left, around 25 feet away, stood a huge, dark figure. It was covered in thick black hair and built like a linebacker. I froze. My friend hadn't seen it yet and kept walking. I whispered his name, quiet but sharp. He must have sensed something was off because he stopped and turned his head. We both saw it then. Neither of us said a word. I was paralyzed. It felt like we were standing there for minutes, but it probably lasted only a few seconds. Deep down, I already knew what I was looking at, even though part of my brain kept screaming it wasn't possible. Then it moved. Slow at first, then faster. It made a sound, something deep and rough, not quite words. It was yelling at us, but in some language or noise we couldn't place. Against every instinct I had about staying calm and standing my ground, I turned and ran. My friend ran too. He kept pace with us easily, letting out a new noise, short, guttural huffing sounds. It sounded angry. It barreled through the underbrush beside us, never slowing, never hesitating. It didn't seem to have trouble with the terrain at all, while we slipped on wet leaves and tried not to fall. When we saw the edge of the forest and the car waiting in the clearing, I felt a flash of hope. But right as we hit the open space, it stopped chasing. Then we heard a tree crack. Something had slammed into it. Not just bumped. It sounded like it had been snapped in half. A second later, a massive tree crashed to the ground right beside us. Then came a sound I'll never forget, like a huge gorilla pounding its chest while howling in rage or victory. It was wild, furious. We didn't stop running until we were inside the car. I threw it in reverse and tore out of there, gravel spraying behind us. The rest of the night was a blur. We got back to our original campsite, packed up everything as fast as we could, and hit the road. We drove for hours until we were well out of the forest. We never brought it up again, not even once. And even now, years later, we haven't spoken a word about that night. But I'm almost completely sure whatever we saw out there, whatever chased us, it was real. It was out there, and it wasn't human. This isn't made up. It's not a spooky story or a campfire tale meant to mess with kids. It might not sound like much compared to other stories you hear online, but being in the middle of it, that's what gets you. Your heart pounds, your skin crawls, and your eyes stay wide. After that night, I started believing scary stories a lot more. I was on a camping trip with a group near Red Cliffs, Nevada. Earlier that day, we'd rafted down a part of the Colorado River, and the sun had been shining the whole time. It was perfect. There were around 10 of us teens, all between 15 and 19. There was me, Reed, a tall, super fit guy, Tyler, Brandon, Zeke, Matt, Wes, and Jonah. We also had 3 adults there with us, friends and family. That evening, we were sitting around the fire, swapping creepy stories. It was just me, Reed, Brandon, Zeke, Tyler, Matt, and Wes at the pit. Jonah was talking with other people nearby, and the last 2 guys, Logan and Travis, were over at another fire making s'mores with a different group. The night was going great. Our phones said the moonlight was only about 4%, so it was almost pitch black. We were mid-conversation when my tent suddenly twitched. It happened just for a second. We walked over to check, but saw nothing. No one was there. No animals, no movement. We all had flashlights and looked around the sparse woods and boulders for several minutes. That's when we found a rock next to the tent. We figured someone had tossed it, and that's what caused the shaking. We settled down after that, and honestly, we probably would have forgotten all about it. Not long after, a light drizzle started. It lasted maybe 5 minutes and completely put out the fire. A few of us grabbed saws and knives and walked to gather dry wood. We had lighters, flashlights, and stayed fairly close, but it was so dark the campfire was barely visible in the distance. Out of nowhere, we noticed movement. Not quick, not too slow, just a soft, steady shuffle. It stopped after a few steps. We couldn't make it out fully, but between our lights and the glow from the old fire, we could see it watching the pit. It wasn't close to us, but it was close to where the fire had been. We ran back yelling and pointing toward it, but it was gone. When the others came to look, they said we were seeing things. The adults stopped by to check in and then went off to their tents. After that, the rest of us just sat there, quiet, waiting, trying to hear if that thing would come back. Matt kept talking even though we told him to shut it. Eventually, we got him to whisper instead. One of the adults suddenly came out of his tent, angry. He wanted to know which of us had scratched at the side of his tent. He told us he was tired, and if it happened again, we'd be skipping breakfast. We were stunned. None of us had done it, and we definitely didn't want to miss breakfast. Logan and Travis came back a few minutes later, and we filled them in. They asked if we were messing around, but we promised we weren't. They said they hadn't seen or heard anything weird. We started thinking maybe Jonah had gotten people from the other groups to sneak around and mess with us. But the direction we saw the shape earlier was nowhere near where Jonah had been hanging out. They would have had to circle through the woods in the dark to reach us. Didn't make much sense. But the stuff didn't stop. We heard branches breaking over and over. Every time we went to look, nothing. We kept sending people up into the trees. They never found anyone. Never even heard anything unusual. Eventually, everyone joined in, even Jonah. And guess what? It happened again. We told him the full story. He swore up and down that he hadn't seen or heard anything and hadn't been part of it. And honestly, no one else was around to do this kind of thing. It wasn't someone in our group. Logan, and Travis went to our tents at that point. We were nervous and shaken up. To distract ourselves, we watched memes and random funny clips on our phones. It didn't help. Then we heard everyone scream. When you hear Reed and Tyler freak out like that, you know it's real. They came crashing into our tent, out of breath, eyes wide. We asked what happened. They'd gone out one more time to look for the thing, sick of not sleeping and being scared. That's when they saw a shadow move. Not there's something else. Something dark. It was like the shadow itself slipped between trees. Reed had his phone flashlight on. He'd been recording stuff for his friends back home. After seeing the shape, they picked up a strange sound. It was a whistle. High-pitched. Creepy. They played the video for us. The whistle was there, clear as day. In the last few seconds, you can see them dive into the tent and zip it shut. But if you pause it right before the zipper closes, you can see something near the fire pit. 2 eyes and a grin. It wasn't a normal smile. It stretched too far. Thin lips, too long, visible teeth. A weird, wrong grin. I don't like that kind of thing in horror stories, and I like it even less in real life. But it was real. It was right there, crooked, grinning, sharp, watching us. We don't really go camping anymore. Not like that. When we do, sometimes, just sometimes, we still see it. That tall figure hidden by the trees. That massive, eerie smile. Still there, watching. To start the story, my partner and I are big fans of the outdoors. We love spending time in the wild and camping out. We're also really into hunting. We used to have hunting land outside a small town called Brentwood, Alabama, quite a few years ago. It had everything a hunter could want. Rabbits, raccoons, white-tailed deer, wild boar, even coyotes. Pretty much anything you'd hope for out there. The place was close to 320 acres. More than enough space for us to wander, hunt, and camp. We always camped at one particular spot off a gravel path, tucked way back into thick woods. Once you pushed through the dense shrubs and trees, it opened into a huge patch of oak trees. It looked amazing. At the time, we had a Honda CR-V with a rooftop tent, so setting up camp for the night was quick and easy. That area was always so calm. There were a few other people renting spots on the land, but they stayed on the opposite side. They were polite and stayed to themselves, so we never had to be concerned about anyone else being around. Out there, once the sun goes down, it gets seriously dark. Like, can't see your hand dark. There's absolutely no light pollution. So if you don't have lights, you're completely out of luck. One night, my partner decided to go night hunting. I think he was trying to catch a few wild pigs. There was a wooden box stand roughly a mile away from where we had set up camp, but I never really worried about staying by myself, since we always carried sidearms for safety. So we set up the tent and I got settled in. Before he left, he handed me one of our two-way radios. These weren't the cheap ones. They had around a 2-mile range. He started heading into the woods, and I could hear the leaves crunching as he walked further and further away, until it was just silence. Before I went to sleep, I decided to watch a few YouTube videos. I put on an old Swamp Dweller episode to relax. About half an hour later, I started hearing leaves rustling. It sounded like it was a fair distance away from the car, so I tried not to get too worked up. Maybe it was a deer looking for a place to settle for the night or something like that. I told myself not to panic over every noise. Animals have lives too. But then the sound got closer to the vehicle. The steps were slow, almost like whatever it was didn't want to be heard. I turned off my phone and just sat there listening. I could hear it moving around the car, almost like it was circling. At first, I thought maybe my partner had come back and just hadn't radioed me yet. I didn't want to call out to whatever it was, just in case it wasn't him. Even though I had my handgun close, the rooftop tent had zip-up windows, and even if I looked, it was pitch black outside. I loaded my weapon and quietly asked, "Babe, is that you?" Whatever it was stopped walking. Then I heard it again, like it was running off into the woods. I still don't know if it was just a nosy deer or something else. I tried to reach my partner on the radio to tell him what happened, but I couldn't get through. Just static. I didn't want to dwell on it too much, so I tried to calm myself down and get some sleep. But then I heard the worst noise out in the trees. It sounded like a hog squealing, but mixed with a choking sound. I knew right away it wasn't a pig. I tried to call my partner on the phone, but the signal was awful, just cutting in and out. The radio still wasn't working either. By now, I was wide awake and full of adrenaline. I couldn't stop thinking, what the heck was that? I sat there clutching my pistol. Then I heard something sprinting straight toward the car. A second later, there was a loud thud like something slammed into the side of the vehicle. Then it made that horrible squealing sound again. All I could think was, please don't climb the ladder. Please don't climb the ladder. For a few seconds, everything went quiet again. Then I heard metal clanking. No, it's climbing the ladder. I moved to the front of the tent where the zipper flap was and aimed my gun toward the ladder. I fired a couple of shots, my heart pounding. Whatever it was let out an even worse scream than before. It didn't sound like any animal I've ever heard. It was straight up terrifying. Then I heard it bolt away. I stayed in the middle of the tent, still aiming my gun at the ladder, waiting for anything else. Suddenly, I heard something charging toward the vehicle again, and I was sure this time it was trying to finish me off. But then I heard my partner calling my name. I climbed down the ladder and told him, "We have to leave now." Without wasting any time, we packed up the rooftop tent, jumped in the car, and sped off. As great as the hunting was and as many good memories as we had out there, I never went back. I don't plan to either.